Today at shop.dap.com, we're going to be installing an IE intake on our B8.5 S4. Okay, so today we're going to be installing an intake on our 3OT S4. First question that most people often ask in regards to intakes is, do they do anything? So on this car, I actually can tell you you will feel kind of a little bit of a difference, throttle response being one of them. Power is always tough to say. The notes that IE has on this is 10 to 15 horsepower. I can say I've driven them with intakes before. It does feel like there is some increase. You know, dyno is the only way to prove exactly what you're getting in terms of any parts you're going to be adding. We are going to be doing some dyno testing as we go through this build. We are not going to be doing this on the intake. But the one thing that you do get with an intake on the 3OT engine is supercharger noise, which sounds like, or, and. So as you can hear, when you add this intake, you do get supercharger noise under a varying load of conditions. It is one of the benefits as far as I'm concerned. Some people may not agree. Factory intakes do have baffling in there to prevent the noise intentionally because they don't want either turbo or supercharger noise, in this case supercharger, and adding this intake will get you that along with some freer flowing intake and some gains. With that said, let's get into our install. Okay, so we're going to be replacing our factory air box and then our intake duct here. We're going to start by removing this cowl trim piece, and we can do so like so, and just pop these in, and then you can usually either kind of pull them up, and you may have to kind of work them up a little bit before you can get a screwdriver under there, and then you can pop them up that way. And then we're going to pop this off just like so. Then we're going to take off this duct here, and it's just 2 Torx screws right here, and this will come up and then just pull out just like that. We can then remove this duct, which we're just going to push down. There are 2 clips right here that kind of hold it in place, and then we can kind of pull that forward and out of the way. Now I'm going to loosen up our clamps here. We have one here by the throttle body, one here on the other side by the airbox. And we're just going to take a 7mm and take that off. You actually can use a flat head as well, but 7mm is easier. And we're loose there. Now we can remove this hose here just to get that loose, and now we can take the top of this airbox off. Okay, so now we're going to take these Torx screws off this airbox. This is actually not required, but I do want you to see what we're looking at inside here, just so you can take a look at for anybody looking to maybe just change their air filter on a 3OT car, that this is going to be how you're going to do it. So just to get an idea of what we're looking at, it only takes a couple extra seconds here. All right, and that top can come right out. I'm going to flip this over. Okay, so you can see here, this is the top of our air box here, and you flip it over. The air filter is attached to that, so you would be replacing this large piece here if you were just replacing with a factory or potentially an upgraded air filter instead of an intake like this IE one that we're working with today. All right, now our air box is actually going to come out of the vehicle. The only thing holding it in place are 2 grommets that are mounted here into the frame rail, and then there we have a secondary air hose here that attaches to this kind of filter thing that's inside the air box, and it's clipped to the bottom. So first thing we're going to do is pop up those mounts there, and then pop this mount up here, and then get our hand underneath here, which you're not going to be able to see because we have to kind of do this blind, but then you're going to squeeze and get this hose out of place. Now we got that loose, we're going to pull this intake out of the way and show you what we're looking at. So here we have our secondary air hose, and where it clips on is on the sides here, on the left and right side here, and then there are these parts here that actually have kind of texture to them to grip, and you squeeze that, and it allows the sides to open up, which will allow that to come down. So you're gonna squeeze in and kind of pull down, and it will allow it off the airbox. Okay, so here we have our intake. This is loose, but not out. So we have this clip here, which actually is kind of just like a fish hook. You gotta push down and kind of pull it out and around, and unclips this hose, and now that's free. And then we have a clip here which just pops straight out the back like that. And the last thing holding on is this vacuum pipe, which doesn't have a clamp. You just kind of wiggle it off and slide it out of place, and you just slide that off the barb right there. And then make sure you don't lose your clamp there. And that's the barb that hose is on. You just slide it off, and we can pull our hose out of place. Okay, so here we have our factory air box. This is the bottom of it. And we are going to be needing these two grommets here and then here. So we're gonna remove those, and all we do is kind of wiggle them off like so. I'm gonna slide that one off. I'm gonna slide this one off. Okay, so now we're gonna start assembling our intake. There is minimal assembly required before we throw this in the vehicle, which we're gonna show you here. So we have this plate here that is included with this IE kit, and that's just these two Allen screws with the washers, and these are 4mm Allens. And we're just gonna thread them in. And then we're gonna flip this upside down like so. And we can take a look. We have this mounting bracket, which goes in these two holes here. And you can see these, there's a screw that has more of a head to it, and then there's recessed stud, which actually goes in place here. So what we're gonna do is thread that in place like so, and then put these nuts with these nylon self-locking part into that as well. Now what we're looking at here is gonna be our 8mm wrench on the other side, and then our 4mm Allen. And we'll snug this guy up. And the same on this side. Those are all tight. Now, these rubber grommets we took off our factory intake have a hole in there, and they just pop onto these, which is a really great design by IE. And we flip this over. Now we have our flange here, and then we have our secondary air hose filter here. So we're gonna slide this through this circle, and then slide it right into the filter. And then we're gonna snug that up as much as possible, and then we're gonna tighten our clamp right here. I'm gonna snug up these two 4mm here before we put this in the car. Now before we get this thrown into the vehicle, we wanna get this bracket mounted in place. It does mount to the front of the vehicle. It does support like so. So we are going to get this bolted to the radiator support, or the radiator fan bracket, essentially, the fan shroud. So we'll show you where that goes right now. Now this bracket that we're showing you is gonna mount like so. And so there are a couple holes here. There's one here, there's one here. There's also one a little further over here. And so we're going for this one right here, kind of directly in front of this high pressure fuel pump right here, and right near this, this line here that runs for the AC system is gonna be the line that we're looking at. So right here is where we're gonna mount it, and this is a self-tapping screw. It's a Torx. And so you can either do one of two things. You can either stick it in there and then thread it in there all the way first before you try to get the bracket in place, because the bracket will make your life a little bit more challenging just because it's going to be in the way while you're working. So either you can spin it to the side and work like this, or you can spin it up and work. But obviously, if you're to the side like this, you can see more of what you're working with here. And so I'm going to thread this in place and then grab a ratchet here and kind of go from the side. And this screw is a T27, but it's not super easy to kind of get a straight angle at it. So you got to make sure you get this thing going in there at a decent angle. Otherwise, you might get too sideways and not be able to mount this thing in there properly. Spin that around like so. Now, if you're feeling like you really wanted to make sure you get as much clearance as possible, there are two 10 millimeters here right outside that's a heat shield. You could remove these two 10s and slide this steel bracket out of place, and that will give you a little more space and probably get a straighter angle at this thing. I am going to just get in there and get it snugged up. You also, you could use a wrench on this and maybe take it off and actually use it in so like so, and then just put a wrench on there and tighten it that way as well. Okay, so as we go on with our intake, we have our two rubber grommets here. They pop into the frame rail right here, and then we have this mounting bracket which goes right here. So we're going to get these two lined up in the frame rail and just pop them in place. You can feel them kind of sit down, and then you should be able to see where this mounting bracket sits in place. And then we're going to thread in this 4 millimeter into there. And I can tell you there's a lot of intakes out there for a lot of different cars, but for me, this intake at the price point it's at, this design is super clean and solid, and for the price point, it's a really affordable way to get a solid quality intake on your car. All right, now we have our secondary air hose that we had before that we took off, and to pop that on, you know, just work it in place like that, and you can hear it kind of click on, and it's all set there. Now we're going to throw on our hose, and this is silicone, so it is pretty solid, so you will kind of need to get everything kind of seated where it's supposed to be beforehand, and then we can rotate that out and get this underneath our throttle body here. And get that in place. You want to make sure the orientation of your clamps are correct so that you can tighten them down once you're ready. And then you may want to just feel underneath just to make sure that this is mounted properly. And we're going to slide this hose onto the intake there and make sure that this guy is all the way where it needs to be. Now I can tell you before, because if you have this thing twisted in a weird orientation, it'll pull off the throttle body a little bit. So if you twist it more towards the front of the vehicle, it'll rotate it more towards the front and get it seated cleanly onto there. And then we're going to take our 7 millimeter again and get that snugged up onto these, and just make sure you have your clamp square on this thing before you go all the way tight on this, because they can get crooked on you. Now tighten that clamp in place, and we are all set there. Now we're going to throw our filter in place. I'm just going to stick that down up in there, and then get that swung in place, and then we'll tighten this guy up. Same deal with our 7, and our filter is snug, and you can see this thing is pretty solidly in there. It's not going anywhere. Now we're going to install this gasket. This is for keeping heat from transferring into the engine compartment as much as possible, and from the intake, keeping it out of here, because obviously we do have all of this part of the engine here. And there is a metal kind of support inside of here, so you will have to bend it pretty good around this turn to get that mounted in there, and you'll have to get it seated all the way into the channel. And we're all set there. Now we're going to mount our duct back in place here, and these are just our Torx screws. And then we're going to mount our trim in place, and we are all set. Thanks so much for watching our intake install for our B8.5 Project S4. Again, support for purchases for parts like this or any others help support videos just like this one. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.